got Wike lloeje from Argonne National Lab coming on board next. While you share your screen, I can tell you a little about him. So he's a research scientist in the Energy Systems Division at Argonne, where he explores questions in sustainable manufacturing, energy and material conversion. He's got a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT and a master's degree as well, with a research focus on technology concepts for carbon capture. His current research combines fundamental engineering science with scientific computing to address science and technology development questions, the intersection of energy, materials, and manufacturing. Specific research topics he's looking at include advanced energy conversion systems, AI for chemical process design, and thermodynamic modeling of critical materials separations. As well, he really enjoys STEM-related educational outreach, particularly hands-on engineering and science education programs. So, Wike, please take it away.
Yeah, Wike, I think you have to unmute yourself.
I do that all the time. Here we go.
Oh, you guys missed the amazing lines I just dropped here. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. In case you're wondering why I'm dressed up this much, I actually reserved this room. It's a larger occupancy room, so the cooling system is actually a full blast. So I've been freezing in here. So it's summer actually here in Chicago. So just make that clear. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about power to gas energy storage for grid flexibility and GHG mitigation. Now, as far as grid flexibility, I'm really looking at being able to support integration of renewables into the grid. And for this, we are looking at, even though it applies to all power to gas technologies, we'll be looking at it from the lens of plasma catalysis as underlying technology. A partial reason for this is that there's growing interest in plasma catalysis, and also most other power to gas technologies have been covered in detail, even in this conference. So this could be kind of a different perspective. Okay, and then in terms of what I plan to do today, so I'll start with an overview, just to give you motivation for this topic. Then I'll cover a little bit on the technology itself, and then go on to the core questions about whether this tech can provide grid level flexibility. Okay, now something you've heard a lot today, which I'm not going to belabor too much, is that we have a challenge, which is that electricity today depends a lot on fossil-based generation, and that leads to significant CO2 emissions. So we can address this problem by introducing renewable-based electric generation, which will lead to lower CO2 emissions. Now, I have you on the slide. This is a study from NREL looking at possible scenarios for renewable energy integration in the grid. And the thing is that, we're in a kind of a unique situation right now, in the sense that we know the direction in which things are trending. There's going to be more renewables in the grid. Now, we don't know exactly what the future will look like, but we have a very clear idea what the trend is. I mean, for instance, for those of you that have been in this kind of area for a while, if you look back 10 years ago, and the main thing people will tell you about renewables is that it's very expensive. But then today, the price, the cost is no longer the issue. Now we're talking about resilience and how it affects the grid. So back to the slides. So you have, actually, I got this, there's an NREL data, there's also like data from EIA, and then they have a projection of about 30% renewable solar and wind generation mix by 2050. Now I have to admit that this is more like a realistic projection. When I say realistic, I mean as against optimistic or pessimistic estimate. But I'm sure that the folks from California would not believe these numbers. Like we already have like much better targets for those places. But then the idea is that if you want to get to that, if you're going to get to that level, so you want to have like 50% renewables penetration, of course, that means you're going to displace CO2 emissions by around 50%. And this is keeping the system boundary just around the energy system without considering like life cycle issues. But then for that, you need about 30% reliance on solar and wind. This is great, except that solar and wind do come with a problem of their own, which is intermittency or variability. So this is what the problem looks like. So an example of a power production profile from a wind turbine over a period of 1 month. Now, this is a nightmare for a system operator. And then also, imagine if you as the end user is exposed to this, it's not gonna be very funny. But then it's actually here that the value proposition for storage lies, because you can, with storage, you can be able to smooth out these peaks and valleys. And then you can also resolve the associated temporal mismatch between supply and demand. So that's actually a very promising thing. Now, what we'll be looking at today is whether power to gas technologies, and specifically plasma catalyzed technologies, can support this storage value proposition. So I guess a good starting point is to think about what storage means for the grid. So I think let's just take a second look at renewable energy. I talked about the fact that it's intermittent or variable. So if you look at that variability, it does have a couple of properties. So there is the magnitude, there is the time scale. There is also like the secondary effects, like the dynamics that can result from if you have to disconnect the renewable source because there's no wind or no solar. And then there's just the other issue of just having a peace of mind, knowing that the capacity will be really there available. So you can see all these features essentially map to different needs that can be quantified as grid services. So in a sense, this is kind of the way sort of the grid sees storage, which is it sees it as a group of a portfolio of services for which you have a number of technologies that can address them. So for example, if you go back to the chart, you can see on the one hand for kind of low storage capacity, short discharge time, you have like supercapacitors or flywheels. And at the other end of the spectrum, you do have like power to gas technologies. And I guess the key point from this is, first of all, to understand that power to gas is just part of the solution. So you can have a portfolio of technology solutions. But then more importantly is that when you're developing these technologies, you should actually be doing it not just considering the performance of the unit tech itself, but also you should look at its place in the larger integrated energy system. So let me just go through this, just kind of give an overview of how this works using this cartoon. So assuming you have wind or solar generation plants that generate electricity and deliver it to the grid. In the event that there is excess electricity from this wind or solar source, you could direct this excess electricity to this conversion reactor, the power to gas conversion unit, where you may have some feedstock, primary feedstock input, and then you now generate a series of energy vectors depending on what your input is and what the technology is. Now this you can move to storage. And then when there's a deficit in electricity to the grid, you can now withdraw from these sources, convert it to electricity and back to the grid. But then the other interesting thing is that you also have the opportunity or the option of actually delivering these stored chemicals to the chemical manufacturing industry, because some of them could be feedstock, something like syngas, even hydrogen could be feedstock for some chemical manufacturing processes. Now, diving in a little bit more, so with power to gas, essentially you are using electricity to either power or enable like chemical reactions that basically create like new chemicals as storage. So they essentially storing electrical energy in chemical bonds. Now in this presentation, I already mentioned I'll be focusing on plasma catalysis, or basically it's better way of putting it is plasma activated catalysis. So on the one hand, you have the plasma, which is kind of have a gas flow exposed to an electromagnetic field, which leads to like a gas breakdown, and then the generation of very, very high energy ions and electrons and radicals. And then these enable reactions that would ordinarily not be possible under those conditions. So typically the reaction, for example, that converts CO2 to maybe CO and hydrogen will require a lot of energy, but then you can actually make this happen at basically ambient temperatures with plasma catalysis, with the caveat that there are conversion efficiencies there. Now, typically what you do, you now couple the plasma reactor with the catalyst, because that actually helps improve selectivity for the product. Now, why we like this technology, or why it's actually a promising option for renewables integration, is that, even like electricity, you can actually switch it on and off. So in sync with the intermittent and the renewable source. However, there is a caveat, and this has to do with the state of the art of the technology. So for example, like I'm showing here a plot showing like energy efficiency versus conversion efficiency for different plasma catalysis technologies. So on the one hand, you have the most common, which is a DBD, the dielectric bed tech, and they tend to have very low energy efficiency and kind of moderate to low conversion efficiencies. At the other end of the spectrum, you do have like the microwave plasma techs, which either have high energy efficiency or high conversion efficiency. These are better, but the challenge with them is that you have to operate at near vacuum. So these things have to be basically have gas traveling at near supersonic speed. And in between the two, you have the gliding arc, which tend to have high energy efficiency, relatively low conversion efficiency. So, but the whole thing, the idea is that the performances are all over the place, and so you don't really have any tech that's got it all. Now, the question becomes that if this is our reality, if this is a reality of the state of the technology, what does this mean, and to what extent can it provide kind of flexible storage for renewable energy sources? Okay, so sort of recapping. So we started with we can mitigate CO2 emissions by introducing renewable energy sources, but then they have a problem of intermittency. We can address that problem using storage. And then one of the storage technologies is power to gas storage, and specifically we are looking at plasma catalysis. But however, we know that it's not all good news, because plasma catalysis right now, the state of the technology, is limited to some extent. So having those numbers, given the particular specific performance level, we now come back to ask this system level question. So first of all, can it provide adequate capacity, flexible capacity? Then secondly, if it can provide this capacity, what is the energy penalty associated with it? And then based on those two outcomes, you also think about what are the key technology hurdles that we need to overcome in order to make this a much more attractive technology. Okay, now to answer this question, something we can do is to kind of reframe it into like a hypothesis experiment structure. So we start with the hypothesis, which is that plasma catalyzed power to gas technologies can provide flexible storage for variable renewable energy integration. And then based on this hypothesis, we can now test it by setting up kind of an experiment using the cartoon I had shown earlier, taking a particular conversion technology for illustration. So here we can set up the reactor, the plasma reactor, and then we're using a gliding arc plasma reactor based on this reference by Lee et al. It has a relatively high energy efficiency, relatively low conversion efficiency, but then it's just an illustration. And then we're going to see how this affects the entire system, and we can also draw conclusions from here that could apply to a whole range of other technologies. Then we can also add the model and data that represents kind of the wind farm. And then, yeah, complete the system by adding the storage and then the power dispatch technology. Okay, so the way we've structured this is, think about, okay, so we have the wind source that has this kind of variable profile, and then we want to have like a steady supply of power coming from the wind plant. So let's say we want to have 100 megawatt capacity. So that means that if we have more than 100 megawatts, we direct it to the plasma reactor, and the user generates the energy vectors. When we have less than 1 megawatt, we now basically withdraw the gases from storage, we dispatch it back to the electric grid. So this is sort of how we set up the experiment. And then based on this, we now go ahead to see if we can answer the questions we set out at the beginning. Okay, so the first question here is, can it provide flexible storage? Can it provide flexible storage for renewable energy integration? So you can see from this chart that, indeed, given that the plasma can actually just switch on and off, it does ramp well with the variable power supply. So I'm just showing a snapshot for just a single day. You can see like the response is pretty in sync. So yeah, the flexibility is there. But then on the right, I'm showing the amount, in this case, we're looking at syngas. You can see that you do have to be able to satisfy, this scenario. You do have to add some supplemental amount of, syngas produced to the syngas to the original, to the amount that quantity was actually produced. So in a sense, you are not really able to meet that capacity within this given period. I mean, part of it has to do with the efficiency of the conversion, which I'll be talking about later. But then another component to this has to do with the, the kind of ramping up to steady state. So this is, it takes a while, some time for the conversion to get to steady state. So in that ramping phase, the extent of conversion is limited. And then for that reason, you spend a good proportion of the time, maybe 40 to 60%, not operating like at the optimal performance of these screen technologies. So you're actually even underperforming based on the specs of conversion efficiency that you have. And that becomes an important consideration. Okay, now to the next question, we're looking at the efficiency. So what's the penalty for providing this storage? So I think in general, so if you look at the system we set up, so you have the plasma reactor, then the storage, and then you have the redispatch. And in this, we're using the gas turbine. So first of all, you have about a penalty associated with just the storage step, which is about 15%. And then there is some penalty for the conversion. So this is conversion from in the reactor. And then the compression for storage takes some. And then you now have the redispatch, which is regenerating electricity from the gas turbine back to the grid. Now, you see that even though with the tech itself, you're just losing 15%, but then with the redispatch step, you're losing an additional 40% or more, depending on whether you're using the combined or single cycle gas turbine. So that's actually a much bigger contributor to the inefficiency of the system. Now, to put this in context, let's compare with some other technology options. So for instance, we have here for lithium ion, the round trip efficiency is somewhere between 85% and 100%. And for pump hydro, it's more like between 75 and 85%. So as far as just conversion to storage is concerned, your plasma reactor is doing pretty great. But then when you now get to the round trip efficiency, you now have a significant penalty here, which I guess the main point is that even though you could spend a lot of time, trying to improve the reactor itself, you should probably pay more attention to the technology you use for that redispatch. Of course, there are other things that do matter here. So for example, one, we do have a low conversion efficiency. So improving the plasma reactor to get higher conversion efficiencies or higher energy efficiencies will give you a higher energy density fuel that can improve this overall process. But then it's a coupled problem. And then finally, just based on these observations about both the flexibility and also the efficiency, what are the key technology hurdles that we need to overcome? I guess the first place I'll start with is, with the power. And then you've seen already that the redispatch is the source of the greatest energy penalty. So there is a need to look at, potential options, alternative options to something like a traditional gas turbine for energy reconversion. One of the easy options is like fuel cells. So you have some efficiency increase between like the typical natural gas turbine and then the solid oxide fuel cell. Now, the problem is that these are still not off-the-shelf technologies, so they have some ways to go. But then this is a direction that the technology advancement needs to go to improve the value proposition of this technology. Now, the second one will now be storage. So right now we have storage in gas form. I talked about syngas here, which is carbon monoxide and hydrogen. But then you could also have direct conversion to hydrogen, or maybe introduce a water gas shift step to make hydrogen. But then gas phase storage is probably not the best in terms of space utilization, except if you have to compress them to very, very high pressures inside. And that also has its own parasitic energy requirements. Alternatives include trying to go all the way to liquid phase products, exploring emerging technologies like metal organic frameworks for storage, or using other like hydrogen carriers. But then you do have to ask some questions whether, imagine if I have a gas product that contains a significant amount of carbon dioxide, do I want to waste all that metal oxide framework real estate just to store carbon dioxide? Then finally, we can get back to the reactor, and think about, okay, what are ways that we can improve the reactor efficiency? There are a number of directions that this could take. For example, discovering new catalyst materials that are more selective towards particular products. Also, there's a lot of work going on to understand better, the plasma and catalyst interactions, because that's in a very, very well kind of understood field. And then, thirdly, you can also consider different reaction pathways, which can be, enabled by, developing new reactor geometries that do make the plasma, kind of make the plasma region, deliver like the plasma radicals just around the catalyst interface to improve compression rates. Okay, so now kind of wrapping up and then giving some closing comments. I think at the first level is that, power to gas technologies, specifically we're looking at plasma catalysis, can actually provide, flexible energy storage to support renewables integration to the grid. This is because it does have that ability to switch up and on, based on renewable energy profiles. And it can also provide on-demand dispatch. And thirdly, there is, it's stable, so it can actually provide long-term capacity. However, there are technology hurdles, both the core technology and the enabling technology. And then we see that in some cases, particularly in this case, the enabling technology is actually more significant, and that's maybe an area that really needs a lot more attention, even more than the reactor itself. However, something I did not talk about, but I think it's important, is thinking about the economics and the economic design for this type of technology. So on the one hand, you're trying to provide storage for the grid. And then, so for that, you do need to look at it the way you would for any other storage technology, which is to consider what are all the services that you can provide to the grid physically, and then include these in an optimization problem. So think about, okay, so what is the net revenue I can get from this array of portfolios of services? both capacity, participation, and also energy. So, but then the thing that is a bit different, that is important here, is that, power to gas does produce some chemical products, which could also have a market in the chemicals industry. So that changes the outlook. So you do have to include that also in your optimization problem. Now, if you start thinking of it this way, something that now comes up is, should I be looking at this as a standalone hybrid system that is just providing storage to the grid? Should I actually start thinking about much more coupled integration with the manufacturing industry? Because essentially you're producing chemical products, making chemical products, and then these are like essentially almost as you're making the same feedstock that is used currently in chemical manufacturing industries. So perhaps rather than trying to constant new build hybrid systems, you can think about the trend towards electrification that is going on in manufacturing today. And then there might be opportunity to push for not just electrification, but also using unconventional energy sources to drive most of these chemical conversions. And the reason is that today, right now, you're using, in most chemical industries, you're using, I think, 40 to 60% of the energy is provided by fossil fuels. So essentially using the fossil fuel, which is a carbon source, to provide energy. If you replace that with electricity, then you can control the amount of electricity you supply by controlling the grid mix. And then the carbon carrier, the fossil fuel, could just be simply that the carbon carrier, not used for energy production. And that will significantly reduce the carbon footprint for this industry, but also change in the very structure of the chemical manufacturing plant, which sees itself not just as a maker of a product, but also a provider of a broad array of services for the energy grid. Okay, so with that, I would like to, first of all, acknowledge Maggie Smith. She was an intern at Argonne, and she's the one responsible for most of the analysis you saw here. She was with us for the spring, and then she'll be starting her PhD in Arizona this fall. And I wouldn't end without kind of acknowledging also the Center for Energy and Environment and Economic Systems Analysis, which is the group I work with at Argonne. So here we do look at a whole range of research work, covering everything from capacity expansion planning all the way to reliability and resiliency modeling. And I guess the main point I want to make here is that if you are interested in anything related to the energy grid, whether it's your research work or just you want to have a conversation, or if you are interested in like an internship in an area covering one of these topics, please feel free to get in touch with me. And if it's not directly related to my field, I'll connect with someone who can help you with that. And then finally, I'd like to thank you for listening and for staying on for this session. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Lloeje, thank you very much for that really interesting talk. We have a question for you from Emanike, who's in the audience, and I'm not sure I totally get the question. So, Emanike, if you're still there, please sort of chime in. Have you considered? But the question, as I understand it, is: did you consider the possible challenge with the time lag for achieving sort of stable efficiencies in your analysis?
Yes, so I mean, that's a good question, I think. One of the things we did was to try to represent the dynamics for the plasma catalytic reactor operation. So I think I probably alluded to it briefly. So there is a delay to get into stated operation. So there is a ramping phase up and a ramp up, and then have a ramp down and up again, depending as the grid energy fluctuates. Now, this is a problem for example, if you're in the chemical manufacturing business, nobody wants to operate plants in dynamic state. Everybody would like steady state because you do lose conversion efficiency, that ramping up and down. So yeah, so we considered that, and that actually added to the penalty that we represented in the result. Now, I must add that these results are actually for a particular case, for a particular reactor design with a particular performance specification. Others will have differences depending on whether they favor more conversion or whether they favor like better efficiency. But I think the trends and the like big picture outcomes are generalizable. I addressed the question, but.
I hope so. And I hope, Emenike, if you're still there, if that got your question, please, if it didn't answer your question, please chime in and let us know, because you gave us plenty of time for questions. So Julie has got a question for you as well. And it's in terms of, in terms of energy efficiency. And he asks, is the gliding arc method the best among all the power to gas processes, including electrolytic? And what kind of selectivity do you get when you're producing the gas? And you could imagine selectivity could be really important. Say, something I was intrigued by, sort of in terms of being able to use CO2 as a feedstock, is that you could use it as a feedstock for sort of downstream, say, microbial conversion processes that you could imagine, say, turning into a biofuel.
So that's a very good question. And the answer also depends on who you ask. So if you ask a researcher developing the gliding arc, technology is going to tell you that that's the best. So just stay with me and give me some more funding for this research.
Do you think Jeffrey Reed could help you out there with his elicitation analysis?
Yeah, but I know. So in terms of raw performance, and then for the results, the data I showed actually has to do with CO2 conversion reforming. But then, so for that, you do have the dielectric bed, which is typically the easiest to work with. It's at ambient temperature is very simple, not complicated. So it does have its advantages, probably when you start thinking about cost. But that is the least efficient in terms of energy efficiency. But they do get, some of the cases do get a better conversion efficiency than the gliding arc. Now the gliding arc is actually much more energy efficient than the electric bed. So that's a big advantage. Now, when it comes to selectivity, that has a lot more to do with the catalysts that integrate with the plasma reactor. So even though catalysts to improve activation, but then they are much better at selectivity. So you actually can direct the reactions towards a preferred product.
Okay.
So, irrespective of the plasma reactor technology you use, I think the catalysts actually play a more important role there. But overall, the best efficiencies have been reported have been for these microwave based plasmas. But like I mentioned, they require operation very close to vacuum. That is, anybody that does any kind of reaction, building a reactor, you don't really want to be doing that. You want to be, atmospheric ambient temperature, because everything is easier to control in that regime. But yeah, but this is the state of the technology right now. There has been significant advancements, recently. So we don't really know where this will go, but there's a possibility that you could have even better conversion efficiencies with the gliding arc to start competing with the microwave techs.
Oh, I got it. What, in terms of numbers, what does the gliding arc method get you in terms of energy, say, energy conversion efficiency?
Yeah, so it does get you're pretty close to 60 to 80% energy efficiency. So which means that you're dissipating just about 20 to 40% of the energy from the electricity. However, where you pay the penalty for that is in the amount of the conversion. Because so imagine if you're trying to convert CO2, let's say CO2, or whatever they call. So you do have low conversion rate. So what that means, because if you just have a one-through process, so like the conversion rate is low. So you have to start thinking about other designs, spiral, or better ways of recirculation, but then that has to come after separation of the product to improve like net conversion efficiency.
Oh, I see. So I see Julie and Jeff Reed have come online. Do you guys have any questions for Wike?
Yes, that's a fascinating talk. And I'm actually trying to type in, so power to gas versus power to liquid. So do you have like updates and insight into, what's the roadblock in the liquid fuel sector?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think on power to liquid is the preferred objective. So that's actually where we want to get to, because it does give you the opportunity to have a much higher density product. And then that also makes, subsequent transportation and storage a lot easier. Now, power to gas is, a lot more common just because it's easy. So for example, if you look at any of this process conversion from, let's say, even CO2 or even methane reforming, the first step gets you like syngas. And then you can actually move on to next, further steps, to get hydrogen. But then trying to go to liquid form usually does involve like getting to higher value hydrocarbons. Now, the selectivity, that's actually more challenging because you do need, there's a lot more emphasis on the selectivity part. That means that you have to actually start looking at the catalysts that enable that transition. So some of the work I've seen, they do have, the conversion efficiency for straight to liquid actually is much lower than the numbers you get for like, making syngas. So that's the situation, and there's a lot more that needs to be done there. And part of the reason why this is challenging is that, part of understanding, the role of the plasma versus the catalyst, and then how, even the plasma can change the behavior of the catalyst, and vice versa. The catalyst can actually change the structure of the electric field, and also change the characteristics of generated plasma. These are things that have not been fully mastered, so there's not complete understanding of how that works. So I think it's still a very, very active area of research.
Yeah, I think in some sense, power to liquid is kind of like a flow battery. So I think if Professor Mike Aziz is on, so maybe we can. Oh, I see he's left. So yeah, so I think sounds like if you go to gas and then go to liquid, it's a multi-step process and maybe very low energy efficiency. So if we can have direct liquid soluble fuel, that'd be very good in terms of flow battery research.
Yeah, that's very correct. One of the things, so even the solids I've seen that have actually gone directly to liquid, making even like all the things, they do have significant amounts of gas products, like carbon monoxide, even some hydrogen gases. So it's a lot of work has to go into catalyst development, or even so the choice of the catalyst, the type of the activity of the catalyst, and also even like the reactor design to enable like very efficient separation.
Okay, so I think we have a raised hand from the audience. Stephen Lamb, do you have a question? I'm not sure that I see. I'm not sure that he's coming through. I had a question. I do have a question from Keena Trowell from McGill University, and she was hoping to ask this to Jeff, but I'm going to pose it to both of you as you're both here. Is there, with regards to hydrogen storage, is there a concern about safety? And she asks specifically not about, say, flawed design, but about, you know, safeguarding against bad actors. Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
Interesting question as to, you know, whether a future hydrogen supply chain would be more vulnerable to, let's say, bad actors or things than existing systems such as natural gas or the petroleum supply chain or electric infrastructure. You know, the experience base for safely managing hydrogen is probably more expensive than people might realize. It's a common industrial gas. It's used extensively in refining. We have 2,500 miles of dedicated hydrogen pipelines in the United States currently, and we have operating several large operating salt cavern storage facilities. So, you know, this isn't my area of primary research, but I've read some things, and you know, all in, but with different safety issues, it benchmarks similarly to gasoline and other fuels that we use. I don't know that, you know, I don't know that the risk of bad actors is more than it would be with the natural gas infrastructure. Interesting question.
Oh, got it. Lloeje, do you have any thoughts on this matter? Or Reinhard, for that matter. I could see you joined us.
Actually, I pretty much agree. I think that the biggest thing to consider is just when it comes to safety is really kind of the technical know-how, like the people that, you know, contract manage it, how well they understand the gas, and is what makes it different from like natural gas that it's much more common. So once you go beyond that, in terms of bad actors, you do have the same risks, because I don't think that they know or can necessarily tell a hydrogen pipeline from a gas pipeline, except if they're sophisticated and they're going for that. And it all falls within the same security challenge that you want to address. So that's my opinion on that.
Fantastic. So this looks like we have come to the end of the session. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our three speakers. I thought this was really, really fascinating stuff from all of you. And I guess I'm going to turn it back